19 points on William Butler Yeats and a walk through Boulder, Colorado. 1. Out of the dark, out of my sleep, with ever silent footfalls into the brightness of the day at hand, breezy wind sweeping down the side of the Flatirons, washing through the trees as birds puff to keep warm, I tuck in a shirt I did not particularly want to wear, with socks sunk from the yesterday, driving in my shoes on the side, I decided, blasting the heat and getting those particles gripping onto woolen fibers. The sun in its brightness made myself laugh out of context. Someone I love truly once told me, all my words are out of context. 2. The poetry I've been reading, Yeats, mostly, but funny enough I was reading Auden, and only 70-odd poems in I have to look up the man, William B., and see him apart from his words. See him through articles and prepositions of biographers, critics who use his image on their currency and represent it as their own false witness. Irish, no doubt, wildly hailed of course, the torch-bearer of the green branch, one who bled gathering roses for the women. He doth bleed too much. Some of those roses were white of petal until the poets decided to bleed all over them. No mystic, but one enthralled with mysticism. Everything repeats? That seems an attempt at mysticism. Made it through a few wars, one great, but his poetry endured. As to Eliot, who wrote of Ash Wednesday, and in a London church where he drifted from Pound's mysticism, who could stand any modern man with even a mote of mysticism nowadays? And who could stand a modern man without a pound of impotence? At least 1 pound. 3. And Yeats also pointed his finger and caricatured his legacy as inane ramblings of ghosts, trying to reach through ice-boxes and retrieve leftovers some sleeping maid left. Not for ghosts, mind the reader, but for herself or her children. And he went for the ice-box. Eyes open he went, and could only reach inside and not pull anything out, so it is up to the poet to either admit this or live inside the icebox, and I shudder to think which he chose. And are all deathbeds cold? He was warm in moments, in shades, none the less impressive, improvised standard, old standards, acute as Chaucer may call business-like, prolific, punched upwards at low characters, but couldn't take the plate through the wall. 4. As though that's where his inane writing was, the same as predecessors. When reading them as a youth he must have muttered, "Oh, to be like them, to enter that congregation." Sad to achieve the status of a ghost, but in an Auden-esque way, we made statues of men, men who would wander as ghosts. Is it wonderful to be a scribe? For he had depth of soul to say, women don't look at broken trees, but he found comfort there. The commoner's theme, and we all know the exactness of that sentiment, the precise place I could name. Know it by heart, the place of the skull, the road, that tree, that broken tree, but it was the women that saw Christ on that tree. 5. My mother's been telling me for years that I'm not like my father. Well, who am I if not like my father, the man of books, of words, letters? I agree personality types differ. Oh, I agree to that sentiment. But the same music touches us. I know the theories of the strings, the beginnings and the ends, the games as well, and I played all for his glory. And he perfectly told me as I brought my offering, "Why art thou crestfallen? If thou doest well, will I not be pleased?" And I said, For I feared thee, because thou art an austere man. And with a look he said, I am your father, and you, my son, will be an austere man. 6. The wild windy walk wounded me up, made me smile, reminisce in the monologue of the bright stage of sunshine, smiles in swift action through scenes, fall back and regard my feet on some bench, off the pavement below as I went forth, hindered and propelled, sails to the wind, whim and whimsy, fantastic traffic and wave-ins from the drivers, who must have been in no such rush as mine to slow their entrances to supermarkets, backing up the flow momentarily, and all because little self decided to coyly smirk and skip forth. 7. I even got tired walking all the way, my hips, and it wasn't serious or anything, but I ached. The dogs ached like nobody's business. Constant thorn of the side, glances of grandiose projections, the hollow man limps uphill into the wind looking for an axe, even though woodsmen could knock over hollow trees with their thumbs. But furthermore I laugh off this brevity of sadness by remembering Jesus Christ was not a hollow tree. 8. A moment that peaks as the mountains, jagged, unreachable, except perhaps once, and then there is no descent. I choose to stay perched curiously and without conversation, other than to running inward monologues of ducks quacking, paddling against a slow, shallow current, and dropping their beaks to nibble at minnows. Teachers and students, as strangers peer across at them as they cross over the bridge, and sunlight speckles over the rocks, glaring over the blacktop. The water refracts light off the running current, and cars are too dusty to be very shiny, like the moon covered in dust as old as my skin. 9. The coffee is good in a cup the size of Lake Innisfree, sitting for 2 pages of scribbled jargon. The last 2, and this presently is the soaring of that first sip. Nothing too great as of yet, not Yeats-esque, not to standard, just the shorter bleeding all over the roses with black ink. The words of Christ are written in red in some publications. I was wont to be a scribe, but I lack discipline, lack wit. Like a stream, the duck's already gotten to most of my minnows, and the water is too shallow for fish, with much poundage, but the rocks are smooth, and the pond behind has parents that let their infants be carried away. 10. My hair got all mussed up, and my nose dripped a little, and I bought an apple I failed to mention, and it sustained me. Now so as Villon's snows of yesteryear. And was Villon a purer poet because he wrote for wine, purer than Burns who wrote for women, purer than the romantics who wrote for themselves? And who will pluck their dross? For they were aware how the roses were carried by women, and Yeats' battlefield sin was only to hold the roses downward as he walked home, white to his hand, as all women would know, had he held them like his hand was nailed above his head. 11. My hand severely hurts so much that I want to cut it off and leave it in the street to be run over, but since it can write sentences for itself, my foot is asleep, but still not useless, and my stomach is full of what soon will be exited into the latrine, and from thence it shall hunger and be filled. So easily is man conquered by his stomach, easier yet to be conquered by the promise of a home-cooked meal, of the warmth of love put into the broth, as if eating daisies weren't good enough for Norwegians. And didn't Jesus come around with everyone alive in the boats? Never had a moment, as when Odysseus meets his boatsman Elepnor's shade in the shades of Hades. He had gotten drunk, decided to fall asleep on a rooftop, and when everyone was in a rush to get off the island, he slipped from the ladder and broke his neck. Later confirmed that he is in limbo all eternity because he wasn't buried. He begs Odysseus to bury him, and Odysseus tries to walk on because he has to throw his offering in the river and talk to a dead blind poet. And boy, those Homeric poems sound like they weren't thought through. And few people would wonder, as I wonder, if Yeats knew Homer was being ironic. And few people would wonder if Odysseus was being ironic when he did return, buried the man, and used his oar to mark the grave. 12. And in my early memory I find no lack of things I saw in books. I do not have what I want in my mind in the photo albums. I thumb through the spring and fall. I can't find photos of winter and summer. I can only live, truly live, in spring and fall. I do not understand the other two, except in dreams. And I was born in the winter. How inane I have become. How purpose-driven against the void, that inanity. My Slavic tones chained to rocks, outweighing the noise. Chained to a rock, playing Virgil to many Homers. 13. Best I run out after this. Better I left now. But as it is started, I will finish the joust of sparring with the writer's adversary, the blank page, and to cut it 1,000 different ways before satisfaction. Ah, and it is just like bleeding on the roses, which I lifted from Shakespeare's Joan of Arc, and the men aren't deciding which to love her. Early work, collaboration, but one worth its merit, worth the image of our bard, and I can't recall if later he dreamed now the clouds would chase him, but someone was the first to say clouds were like graves. 14. Direct sunlight facing the street, my sweatshirt wraps up my book of collected poems tucked under my feet, and the place is wont to have sparrows nibbling at pieces of bread dropped by us on the row. I reveal the shirt I didn't want to wear to everyone passing hurriedly along the street, and there is little or no chance anyone is going to stop for a closer look, but my hope is, in fact, that a small bird notices the wrinkles and is scared off joyfully like a child scared as a game, a lark. The walk, the second walk, all downhill, wind at my back. Could see my shadow yesterday, somberness, suddenness, lack-witted follies of men. 15. Send my tin ear to the seashell moon, from Yeats. Again put me on an airplane and crash it deep in some crater of the lower heavens. My first splash of water, cool river with a fence line and some of the lines are underneath. Or a clothesline with granddad's long johns and the birds with feet smaller than snowflakes, clothes and clothespins drying out like a clear undercurrent, blue like a mirror, blue like the river above, waiting to turn vermilion and violet, and the sun to be scattered, and lilacs for the springtime, and rust for the fall, and scattered dust, scattered like so many stars, twinkling, mild, and with honeyed strands, blushing at the statuesque sun. 16. Heading to work after I grab some beef and starch, spending way too much on myself to have a good day. For the sake of my sanity, what is the price? I might become a slave to this rhythm. I need to beg more alms, or give more. Either would be for my benefit. Hopefully find some place to rest my weary brow. The crooked glances of pause, the whole mess is scattered, and the context is wildly misinterpreted. No infinite shape-up will render me whole again, In line to go to recess, at the recession I wander to the corner. 17. Anticipating warmth, the spicy toppings, the morning subsided, the rush ebbed out and the tide low enough to reveal the greater portion of the beach head. My legs up under me on the bar stool, blinking in fear of stopping short of brilliance or running far past the mark. For regardless if one wins or loses a race, they can run as many laps afterwards as they choose. But the race is timed. Even when things are cold, they are digestible. I walked back full, knowing gradation of numbers does not mean gradation, but it affects averages, and there are swift swings that have happened. And numbers are also not degradation. They are all zeros. 18. I knew of Yeats. Think where man's glory most begins and ends, and say my glory was I had such friends. And I'm sure some won't know as I put forth without truly knowing, but propose such as that in a coy way Yeats meant that his friends were in his books and writers were his glory, and that his friends were mostly men, and he probably was terrified of living corpses more than seeing the statues of the saints, and that Yeats wasn't the first poet to step onto a battlefield and commit sins, but Christ will edit out the textual flaws. And would he care to be called Blake's tiger if he wasn't Edna St. Vincent was? I will not call him a statue or a ghost, but a hopeful partaker of the resurrection, and our editor-in-chief will remind us once again and realize we're all writing stories about his mother, and soon we'll learn the notion. Women poets don't use men as currency. 19. Walking to work, I heard one woman say to another, I cleaned my house like a maid. So there's that to William Butler Yeats. He was no maid. He was the product of determination, and he seemed to me one who thought his childhood mattered above mysticism, as all children are pure mystics.